What's going on, everyone? Dots Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys a beginner overview to the Priest class in World of Warcraft, giving you an introduction to the class and some beginner setups that you can use to get used to the class and its mechanics. Now, this video does assume that you at least have a base understanding of World of Warcraft and are looking for more of a class introduction. So if you're watching this video and are also brand new to WoW as a game, I recommend checking out my World of Warcraft Complete Beginner Guide, which will teach you all of the non-class specific things that you need to know to get yourself started in WoW and better understand this video. Link can be found in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into today's video covering the Priest class. Priests in World of Warcraft are exactly what you think of when you think of a priest or cleric type class, a cloth-wearing ranged class that uses the powers of light to heal and shield their allies, as well as damage their enemies. Some priests, though, even embrace the powers of the void, using shadowy dark magic to assault the minds of their opponents. Priests bring a wide variety of tools and utility to a group and are a great class to have in your party. The priest class is a hybrid with 2 specs for healing and 1 for DPS. Disciplined priests have an interesting healing style, focusing on shielding allies from harm while healing them through the damage that they deal to enemies. Holy priests have a more traditional style of healing, using the power of the light to heal their allies and chastise their enemies. Finally, Shadow is the damage dealing spec for the class, focusing on shadowy magic and the powers of the void to damage their enemies and even heal their allies. The priest's primary resource is mana, while Shadow also has a resource called Insanity. Insanity is built up with certain skills and then primarily spent on a hard-hitting damage over time skill called Devouring Plague. Priests wear cloth armor, they utilize intellect as their primary stat, and they can wield wands, staves, daggers, one-handed maces, and non-shield offhand items. Now, the following builds that I have for you guys today are tailored towards new players looking to make your rotation as easy and straightforward as possible, while adding as few additional skills to your action bars, but focusing mainly on passive increases. If you're looking for something more advanced and focused on dealing as much damage or healing as possible, I recommend checking out Icy Veins or Wowhead for their advanced setups that are more tailored towards endgame raids, Mythic Plus, and rated PvP. Now, starting off on our first specialization, we have the Disciplined Priest, with our first talent being Twist of Fate. Now, this talent makes it so that after you heal a target that is below 35% health, you deal 20% increased damage and healing for 10 seconds, helping you to more easily top off the person's health bar that you're trying to heal, as well as the rest of your allies. Our next talent is going to be Angelic Feather. Now, this gives us a really strong active ability that gives us and our allies some nice added mobility. You basically just place a feather on the ground that makes it so that the first ally, or if yourself, that walks through it gains 40% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Mindbender. Now, this talent buffs our Shadow Fiend and actually turns it into a Mindbender, summoning a creature of the void that attacks the target and grants us 0.5% mana every time it attacks. The cooldown on this is only 1 minute, allowing us to use this very frequently to help our mana pool. Our next talent is going to be Psychic Voice. Now, this talent reduces the cooldown of Psychic Scream, which is an AoE fear that we have, by 30 seconds, allowing us to use the CC much more frequently. Our next talent is going to be Sins of the Many. Now, this gives us a passive damage buff, increasing our damage by up to 12%, but it becomes less effective the more allies that have Atonement on them. Now, Atonement is a buff granted from some of our abilities that make it so that when we deal damage, our allies are healed. It's a passive that is at the core of the Disciplined Priest, and this talent helps us deal more damage to be able to more easily heal our allies. Our next talent is going to be Purge the Wicked. Now, this replaces our basic Shadow Word Pain damage over time skill with a more powerful dot for the spec, dealing fire damage over time and having it jump to a nearby enemy when we deal damage to the affected enemy with Penance, which is a skill that fires bolts of light at the enemy to deal damage, or we could even fire it at allies to heal them. Our final regular talent is going to be Lenience. Now, this talent makes it so that allies affected by Atonement take 3% less damage, making your party a bit more tanky and easier to heal. If you do choose to take the Disc Priest into PvP, these are some talents I'd recommend, with the first one being Dome of Light. This PvP talent increases the potency of one of your defensive cooldowns, Power Word Barrier, by reducing the cooldown by 90 seconds and making it mitigate 25% additional damage. Now, Power Word Barrier places a dome on the ground that makes it so that allies inside take less damage. So this cooldown just makes that this talent just makes that cooldown even stronger. Our next talent is going to be Ultimate Radiance. Now, this passive talent heavily buffs our Power Word Radiance. This casted skill heals our allies and applies Atonement, and this talent makes it instant cast and heal for 250% more, making it extremely potent. Our final PvP talent is going to be Dark Archangel, and this gives you an active cooldown to increase your damage by 15%, which will also in turn increase your healing. In addition, any allies affected by Atonement also gain 15% damage, giving your entire party a big damage boost. Now, in terms of how to play a Discipline Priest, Discipline plays a lot different than other healers. They primarily heal through their Atonement passive. Now, Atonement is applied through Power Word Shield, Shadow Mend, and Power Word Radiance. When you deal damage, allies affected by your Atonement will be healed for 50% of the damage that you deal. Now, while many healers play reactively to what is happening, Disc Priests play proactively, responding before things happen. The goal is to have Atonement on your allies who will need healing in the future, so that once they start taking damage, you can start healing them with your DPS rotation. If you're like, trying to apply Atonement while people are taking damage, you're gonna have to go through the Atonement applications, then try to deal damage. You just need to be proactive or you're going to fall behind. Now, the general DPS rotation though for Disc Priest when Atonement is on your allies and you want to start healing them is as follows. You simply want to maintain Purge of the Wicked on your target, use Penance on cooldown, which will cause Purge to jump around. Also keep in mind that Purge of the Wicked has a chance to grant Power of the Dark Side procs, which is a passive that you have that makes Penance 50% more effective. You also want to use Mind Blast on cooldown, and then when those 3 skills are on cooldown, just use Smite as a filler. Now, Atonement can be initially applied to a target via Power Word Shield, or you could use Power Word Shield to apply Atonement to your targets on the move. If you're able to stand still, and if targets are taking a low amount of damage, you're going to want to apply Atonement to them using Shadow Mend, which is just a basic heal, and then go through the DPS rotation that I just listed. Now, when damage starts to get high and Atonement healing does not feel like it's enough to heal your allies, you're going to want to use Power Word Radiance in this situation to burst heal your allies and get Atonement on as many people as possible instantly, and then afterwards, go through your regular DPS rotation. Now, in terms of some offensive notes, Mindbender is going to be best used in a situation where you need that extra damage to help keep your party alive via Atonement, or if you're starting to get low on mana. Now, if an enemy has a magical buff on them that you want to remove, you could actually dispel it using Dispel Magic to purge it off. And if an enemy is about to die and no allies need healing at any time, you can use Shadow Word Death to help it execute this enemy. This can be used in tricky ways as well in like PvP to break yourself out of CC that breaks on damage by using it just before the CC hits, so that the return damage from Shadow Word Death will hit you once you're in the crowd control, thus breaking you out. Now, some defensive notes for the Disc Priest. If one of your allies are going to take a big damage spike, or if they're just taking too much damage, Pain Suppression is a great skill to use on that ally, as it reduces their damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds. Power Word Barrier is going to be best used when your party is taking big damage, as this AoE shield reduces damage that allies take who stand within it by 25% for 10 seconds. Now, Rapture is a cooldown that's best used proactively when you think your group is about to take a large damage spike. This automatically applies Power Word Shield to your target and makes your Power Word Shield absorb an additional 200% damage. So you can start spreading Rapture Power Word Shields onto your entire party. And then once you have these big shields out, you can start going into your DPS rotation and start healing everybody up. Now, if you get aggro from an enemy, you could use Fade to drop all of that threat so that your tank can pick those mobs that are attacking you back up. Use Angelic Feather if you or an ally need a burst of movement. Use Purify if an ally is affected by a negative magical effect that needs to be removed. Make sure to keep all allies buffed with Power Word Fortitude to get the health increase. You want to use a Leap of Faith to pull an ally to your position if they are in a compromising location. Use Desperate Prayer if you need a quick free heal for yourself in a pinch. Use Psychic Scream to fear off enemies off of you and your allies if you do feel overrun, but do be careful about using this in dungeons. If a feared enemy runs over to a group of enemies that you're not currently engaged with, you're going to get threat from those enemies and you might just get overwhelmed. You want to use Mass Dispel to disable all negative effects on allies and one positive effect from each enemy in the area. This can also dispel things that are normally not dispellable, like a Paladin's Divine Shield or a Mage's Ice Block. Now, in terms of a secondary stat priority for Disc Priest, I recommend Haste, followed by Crit, followed by Versatility, followed by Mastery. In terms of Shadowlands specific information, I recommend going Venthyr for the Disc Priest, with my recommended legendary being Memory of the Penitent One. Moving into our next spec for Priest, we got another healing spec, and that is Holy. Now, if the proactive healing style of the Disc Priest doesn't sound like it's for you, thankfully, Priests do have a second healing spec that plays a bit more traditionally, and Holy is that spec. And for our talent builds, our first one is going to be Renewed Faith. Now, this talent makes it so that our healing is increased by 10% on targets affected by Renew, which is our primary hot, giving us much better throughput. Our next talent is Angelic Feather, giving us a strong active ability that gives us and our allies some nice added mobility. You place a feather on the ground that makes it so that the first ally that walks through it gains 40% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Guardian Angel. Now, this passive talent makes it so that if Guardian Spirit expires, Without saving the target from death, the remaining cooldown is reduced to 60 seconds. Normally a 3-minute cooldown, this spell makes it so that for 10 seconds, the ally that has the spell casted on them receives 60% additional healing. In addition, if they would die, the spirit instead sacrifices itself and saves the ally. Now, this talent helps you heavily reduce the skill's cooldown if you cast it on an ally, but manage to save them without the cheat death effect proccing. Our next talent is going to be Censure. Now, this makes our Holy Word Chastise, which is normally an Incapacitate, a 4-second stun that doesn't break on damage, making it a bit more reliable as a CC. Our next talent is going to be Surge of Light. Now, this talent makes our Smite, which is an offensive casting spell that we had, and all of our various healing spells have an 8% chance to make our next Flash Heal, which is a strong spot healing tool that we have, instant cast, and have no mana cost. Our next talent is going to be Benediction. Now, this talent gives our Prayer of Mending, which is a heal that procs on an ally when they take damage and then jumps to somebody else. Have a 25% chance to leave a Renew on the target that it heals, combining really well with Renewed Faith. Our final regular talent is going to be Holy Word Salvation. Now, this gives us an incredibly strong emergency cooldown that heals all allies within 40 yards, applies Renew, and 2 stacks of Prayer of Mending, giving a huge burst of healing to your entire party. Now, if you do choose the PvP on the Holy Priest, these are some talents that I'm going to recommend, with the first one being Greater Fade. Now, this is a PvP talent that makes Fade, which is a skill that normally just drops threat, turn into a defensive cooldown by making it increase your movement speed by 50% and causing most attacks and spells to miss for 4 seconds or until you take a hostile action. Our next talent is going to be Miracle Worker. Now, this makes Holy Word Serenity, which is just a strong single target heal that we have 2 charges and 25% reduced cooldown, allowing you to have much greater access to this powerful heal. Our final talent is going to be Cardinal Mending. Now, this talent strengthens your Prayer of Mending further by having it heal the target for 10% of their maximum health while ignoring any healing reduction effects, which is perfect for PvP. Now, in terms of how to actually play the Holy Priest, Holy Priests have a boatload of heals at their disposal, with each heal kind of serving a different purpose. You typically, though, want to use Prayer of Mending on cooldown on your tank so that it can proc when the tank takes damage and then bounce to somebody else. In addition, you want to maintain Renew on your tank because that's just going to be really helpful to increase your throughput via the Renewed Faith talent. From there, I think you kind of want to move into like an if-then priority system when playing Holy Priest. So if an ally is taking low amounts of damage, you're just going to want to use Heal. It's just going to be your go-to spell. Prayer of Healing, though, can be used when several allies are taking just, a low, amount of damage. If your group is taking a moderate amount of damage, if a single person is taking a moderate amount of damage, you're going to want to use Flash Heal or use Flash Heal whenever you get a Surge of Light proc. Now, if several allies need moderate healing, you're going to want to use Circle of Healing on cooldown to restore their HP. Now, if an ally needs heavy spot healing, you're going to want to use Holy Word Serenity for a strong single target heal. And if multiple people need heavy heals, you're going to want to use Holy Word Sanctify. If no allies are currently in need of healing, simply apply Shadow Word Pain onto your enemy and use Holy Fire. And if people still don't need healing, just fill globals with Smite. In terms of some offensive notes, if an enemy has a magical buff that you want to remove, use Dispel Magic to purge it off. Now, if an enemy is about to die and no allies need healing, you could use Shadow Word Death to help execute them. You could also use Shadow Death in tricky ways to break yourself out of CC that would break on damage by just using it before the CC hits so that the skill's return damage will hit you when you're in the crowd control, thus breaking you out. In terms of some defensive notes, if you think your tank or another party member is going to die, use Guardian Spirit to give them death protection and heavily increase the amount of healing that they receive. Divine Hymn and Holy Word Salvation are long cooldown AoE heals that do absolutely massive amounts of healing. You want to use these in emergencies when you really need that extra group-wide healing. You want to use Holy Word Chastise to stun problematic enemies. If you get aggro for an enemy, use Fade to drop all that threat. Angelic Feather can be used if you or an ally needs a burst of movement speed. Use Purify if your ally is affected by a negative magical effect that needs to be removed. You can keep all allies buffed with Power Word Fortitude for the extra health increase. Leap of Faith will pull an ally towards your position, and this is great if someone's standing in a bad spot. You could just pull them back towards you. Desperate Prayer is a good heal for just like yourself if you need to be healed in a pinch for absolutely free. Psychic Scream is good to fear enemies off you and your allies if you feel overrun, but do be careful about when you actually use this, because if a feared enemy runs to a different group of enemies that you're not currently fighting, it will get aggro on them and then they'll start attacking your party as well. You want to use Symbol of Hope if you or other healers in your raid need mana during a very, very intensive fight. So just that is something to keep in mind too. It's a really, really good tool that Holy Priests have. Finally, Master Spell can be used to dispel all negative effects on allies and one positive effect from each enemy in the area. This can also dispel things that are normally not dispellable, like a Paladin's Divine Shield or a Mage's Ice Block. Now, in terms of some secondary stats for the Holy Priest, crit is about equal to Mastery, followed by Versatility, followed by Haste. In terms of some Shadowlands specific information, I recommend going Necrolord for the Holy Priest. And then for your recommended legendary, I like Zenshi, Return of the Archbishop Benedictus. There's a lot of opinions on what good legendary you should use for Holy. There's a bunch of good options, but I think this one is good for newer players too, because for those of you who don't know, Holy Priests have a passive where if they die, they turn into this big spirit for a period of time and are still able to heal their allies. This kind of gives you a cheat death where you come back to life after this effect procs, and it just gives you basically like a oopsie protection in case you do die. So I think this is a really good legendary for newer players to use, just because it basically gives you a second life during a fight. And plus, I think it's a very cool interaction to have. Moving on to our next spec, the damage dealer, that is going to be the Shadow Priest, with our first talent being Fortress of the Mind. This talent makes it so that your Mind Blast and Mind Flay, which are two of your primary damage dealing skills, deal 10% more damage and generate 20% more insanity, which will allow you to fire off more Devouring Plagues, which is our hard-hitting dot that we spend our insanity on. Our next talent is going to be Body and Soul. Now, this gives us some much-needed mobility on the Shadow Priest, causing our Power Word Shield, which is just a basic defensive shield, and Leap of Faith, which is the skill that lets us pull an ally to our position, to increase our target's movement speed by 40% for 3 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Misery. Now, this passive talent frees up some global cooldowns for the Shadow Priest, making it so that your Vampiric Touch, which is one of your primary dots, automatically applies one of your other primary dots, Shadow Word Pain. So you don't have to spend 2 globals applying the dots, only 1. Our next talent is going to be Last Word. This talent lowers the cooldown of Silence, which prevents any enemies from casting and interrupts any current casts by 15 seconds, allowing you to use the CC more often. Our next talent is Auspicious Spirits. This talent makes it so that your shadowy apparitions deal 15% increased damage and generate 2 insanity. Shadowy apparitions get summoned when your Mind Blast, Void Bolt, or Devouring Plague deal damage, and they float towards your target affected by your Vampiric Touch, dealing damage when they reach them. Our next talent is going to be Mindbender. Now, this talent buffs our Shadow Fiend and turns it into a Mindbender, summoning a creature of the Void that attacks the target and grants us 5 insanity every time it attacks an enemy. The cooldown is also only 1 minute, so we can use this very frequently. Our final talent is Hungering Void. Now, this changes the way our Void form works, which is our primary offensive cooldown. Normally, Void form just increases your damage by 20%, gives your Mind Blast 2 charges, and lowers its cooldown for 15 seconds. In addition, while in Void form, the actual skill that you use turns into Void Bolt, which is a hard-hitting single target skill. With this talent, Void Bolt makes your target vulnerable, causing it to take 10% more damage from you for 6 seconds, and extending Void form's duration. Therefore, the more Void Bolts you're able to get off on the target that is currently vulnerable to you, the longer your burst window will be. Now, if you do choose to PvP on the Shadow Priest, these are the talents I'd recommend, with the first one being Greater Fade. So this is a PvP talent that makes Fade, which just normally drops Thread off of you, into an actual defensive cooldown by making it increase your movement speed by 50% and causing most attacks and spells to miss for 4 seconds or until you take a hostile action. Our next talent is going to be Void Origins. Now, this talent makes it so that Void Eruption, which is the skill that you need to cast to get into Void form, instant cast. And this is going to help prevent enemies from stopping you from getting into Void form and dealing your damage. Our final talent is going to be Lasting Plague. Now, this makes Devouring Plague, which is your main insanity spender, last 6 seconds longer. This is a very hard-hitting dot that heals you for some of its damage, so maximizing its uptime is very important. Now, in terms of a rotation for the Shadow Priest, with the talent build in this guide giving a ton of passive bonuses, our rotation is actually relatively straightforward. First off, you want to make sure that you are in Shadow form. You always want to make sure you have that on when you're playing Shadow Priest. Now, when you get into a fight, apply Vampiric Touch to as many targets as you can, which will automatically apply Shadow Word Pain thanks to Misery. You then just want to use Mind Blast on cooldown to generate Insanity. You then also want to use Mind Blast when you get Dark Thoughts procs from your dots, which gives you a charge of Mind Blast to use. And do note that if you get this proc while channeling the next skill I'm going to mention, Mind Flay, which is basically your filler for a single target, you could actually use Mind Blast while casting the Mind Flay. You don't have to cancel the Mind Flay. If you are filling, like you need a filler skill though against multiple enemies, you want to use Mind Sear instead of Mind Flay. Mind Flay is for 1 to 2 enemies. Mind Sear is for 3 or more. Now, when you hit 50 Insanity, you're going to want to apply Devouring Plague to your primary target, and then when your target is 20% health, use Shadow Word Death on cooldown to help execute them. Now, in terms of some offensive notes, Mind Bender can be used frequently to help assist in your damage and generate extra insanity to make sure you can easily pump out Devouring Plagues on your enemies. Now, when you want to deal your big damage, you want to use Mind Bender to start generating a ton of insanity, and after that, use Void Eruption to get into Void form. Now, be sure to use Void Bolt on cooldown on your exposed target, which is typically going to be the priority monster in a pack or the boss, so that you can maintain your Void form for as long as possible. You also want to use Power Infusion in conjunction with this to maximize your burst damage. Now, you don't always have to use the 3 cooldowns that I just mentioned together. You can kind of stagger their use since they all have different cooldowns. But if, like, for example, Void Eruption is off of cooldown and your Power Infusion only has like 10 seconds left on cooldown, it's better just wait for Power Infusion to come back up to use both of them in conjunction before, instead of just going into Void form without it and then like using it later. Now, if an enemy has a magical buff on them that you want to remove, you can use Dispel Magic to purge it off. In addition to using Shadow or Death as an execute, this can also be used in tricky ways to break yourself out of CC that would break on damage by using it just before the CC hits, so that the return damage hits you once you're in the crowd control, thus breaking you out. Now, some defensive notes for the Shadow Priest. If you're going to take a big burst of damage and need to play defensively to stay alive, use Dispersion. This reduces your damage taken by 75% for 6 seconds and increases your movement speed, but you can't take any other actions besides moving during that time. If you and your allies need some additional healing, use Vampiric Embrace to turn a portion of the damage you deal into passive healing. You can use Shadow Mend if you or an ally need to heal in a pinch. If you do get aggro from an enemy, use Fade to drop all the threat. You want to use Power Word Shield to give yourself some extra defense and some additional movement speed when you need it. Use Purify Disease to remove any diseases from a friendly target. Be sure to keep all allies buffed with Power Word Fortitude for the health increase. Use Leap of Faith to pull an ally towards your position if they're in a compromising location. Use Desperate Prayer if you just need a quick free heal on yourself in a pinch. Psychic Scream is going to be good to fear enemies off of you and your allies if you feel overrun. Be careful about using this in dungeons though, because if a feared enemy runs over to a group of enemies you're currently not engaged with, you're going to get threat from those enemies. Use Silence on enemies casting problematic skills to prevent those spells from hitting you or another party member. Finally, use Mass Dispel to dispel all negative effects on allies and 1 positive effect from each enemy in the area. This can also dispel things that are not normally dispellable, like a Paladin's Divine Shield or a Mage's Ice Block. In terms of some secondary stats for the Shadow Priest, I recommend Haste, followed by Critical Strike, which is about the same as Mastery, followed by Versatility. In terms of some Shadowlands specific information, I recommend using the Venthyr Covenant, and for your recommended legendary, I recommend Memory of Talbadar. I do just want to remind everybody that for the legendary choices for these guides, I do try to do things that are not from the raid to make it easy for people to be able to acquire these legendaries and really get themselves started on their characters. But with that out of the way, guys, that is going to be it for me on my priest guide. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful and that you learned something. And if you guys did like this video, I would appreciate if you left a like on it. If you have any questions about the priest, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And if you guys want to see more of these types of guides from me, please hit that sub button as well as the bell to keep notifications on. I'm also going to be starting to post a lot of gameplay very, very soon. So if you guys do want to see that, be sure to make sure you hit that sub button. But guys, that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for stopping by and spending some time here today. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.